You didn't take it no-nos? You take it no-nos today? Goes? Can I put it in that window? So nobody can I'm here.
Good to see you this evening. Thank you for being here. If you will, take a songbook and turn to 336. So we have first song, 336. The only thing I have, or addition to the sick list, is Paxton. He's home not doing well at all. Stomach virus and also tested positive for strep throat. So he's suffering that there. Keep them, his family, in your thoughts and prayers. And also those I mentioned this morning. Open prayer, Brother Ron Hartley. Closing prayer, Brother Bobby Nobley. And Kirk and the song service. Okay, events. Tonight we have our cookie swap over across the lake as soon as we're dismissed in here. Please stay and work with that. Shouldn't take too long, I don't think. And we'll get those distributed. Next Sunday, the 23rd, will be our Justice Service Times. Please adjust our times for that. Also, the 30th is going to be the Meadows Worship Service at 2 p.m. at the Assisted Living at the Meadows Nursing Home, the 30th. If I've left anything off, obviously, see me after services, and let it your list. Thank you again for being here.
336, Is It For Me? We'll sing this song and then we'll have our opening prayer. Is it for me, dear Savior, thy glory and thy rest? Only so weak and sinful, oh, shall I be so blessed? Oh, Savior, my Redeemer, what can I but adore? And magnify and praise thee, and love thee evermore. Is it for me thy welcome, thy gracious internet? For me thy company blessed, for me so full of sin. O Savior, my Redeemer, what can I but adore? And magnify and praise thee, and love thee evermore. O Savior, precious Savior, my heart is at thy feet. I bless thee and I love thee, and thee I long to be. O Savior, my Redeemer, what can I but adore? And magnify and praise thee, and love thee evermore. I'll be with thee forever, and never grieve thee more. Dear Savior, I must praise thee, and love thee evermore. O Savior, my Redeemer, what can I but adore? And magnify and praise thee, and love thee evermore.
Dearest Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for allowing us another opportunity to come and worship you. Pray, Heavenly Father, everything that's done here this evening as well as in your sight, to do what's good for your kingdom. We pray that you be with those who are not with us this evening due to sickness. Watch over them and comfort them and give them back good health. Heavenly Father, we ask you through the Spirit of the hour and give them good revelation of the message he's prepared. Pray for each one of them. For each person that's here this evening that put their attention towards the message, do the best and worship you. Please be with each of us in this hour as your source sins. Christ.
Our next song will be 855, God's Family. 855. We're part of the family that's been born again. Part of the family whose love knows no and made us his own. And we're part of the family that's on its way home. And sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's heavenly. And though some go before us, we'll all meet again, just inside the city, as we enter in. There'll be no more parting, with Jesus we'll be together forever. God's family. And sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family. Next song will be 839. When all God's singers get home. 839. What a song of delight in that city so bright, holy ones who keep heaven's great goal. How the ransom will raise, happy song to his praise, when all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home, whenever a sorrow will come, there'll be no place like home. When all of God's singers get home. As we sing here on earth, songs of sadness and mirth, is a foretaste of rapture to come. But our joy can't compare with the glory up there, when all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home, whenever a sorrow will come, there'll be no place like home. When all of God's singers get home. Having no good comes in,
Hallelujah, amen, will be heard in that land o'er the fold. Every heart will be light, and His face will be bright, when all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home, where never a sorrow will come, there'll be no place like home, when all of God's singers get home.
Second mark this time, the song of encouragement will be 520. Only a step. 520. If you have that mark, the song before the lesson of the hour will be 727. 727. We shall see the King someday. Like stand as we sing the song, you may. Though the way we journey may be often dread, we shall see the King someday. On that blessed morning, clouds will disappear. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when He shall call His own. We shall see the King someday. After pain and anguish, after golden hair, we shall see the King someday. Through the endless ages, joy and blessing share. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when He shall call His own. We shall see the King someday. There with all the loved ones who have gone before, we shall see the King someday. Sorrow past forever on that peaceful shore. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when He shall call His own. We shall see the King someday.
Good to see you. Good to be with you. Appreciate your presence. Appreciate the opportunity to open the Bible and to study from God's Word, to think about our lives and how we might improve our lot in life as a Christian, to see how we might grow. Now, I was just thinking, singing that song before I got up here, what I might say. I've got things prepared, but tonight we're going to talk about disciplining ourselves towards godliness, looking at 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. But I was just thinking as we sang the song, We'll See the King Someday, I thought about Bible history for just a minute and think about the three dispensations, patriarchal, Mosaic, and Christian. We live in, of course, the Christian dispensation. But if you think about the length of time that the patriarchal dispensation was about 2,500 years, from the time of creation till Mount Sinai. Think about the Mosaic dispensation, it was about 1,500 years. And so, looking at the Christian dispensation, we're in it about, 2,000 years now. So, we're about midway between what the length of the other two were. So, I'm not saying that Jesus is going to return tonight. It may be another 500 years, it may be 1,000, we really don't know. But, based upon the two other dispensations and the time frames of them, God put a short period of time, really 1,500 to 2,500 years as far as time frames concerned. So we need to be thinking about the future as far as making preparation, and that's what we're going to talk about for just a few minutes tonight. But we also need to think about the fact that the Lord could return tonight, and we need to be prepared because this dispensation will end just like the other two did, and we don't know exactly when that will be. We're going to talk about disciplining ourselves tonight. Disciplining. 1 Timothy 4 verse 7 says, "But refuse profane and old wives' fables, and exercise thyself rather unto godliness. For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come." We are to make ourselves into something while we're here. We have time and opportunity to build our lives, spiritually speaking, so that we can be prepared if the Lord should return, and also to make the best use of our time while we're here in doing the things that are necessary so that we can be the best that we can be. You think about preparing ourselves by disciplining ourselves to godliness. Godliness is a Greek word, eusebia, meaning piety towards God. It's mentioned 15 times in the King James Version. 14 of those times it means godliness, and the one time it is mentioned it means holiness. So we want to think about working towards or disciplining ourselves to becoming a godly individual. Godliness is giving God the right place in our hearts. It is also taking the right actions toward those things that are divine in nature. You know, Paul is encouraging Timothy here to exercise himself to the acquisition of godliness. Exercise, that term exercise is used in the King James Version. It's also used in other versions using the word to train. We're talking about training ourselves up to be godly people. The New American Standard Version uses the word discipline there, and that's the word that I want us to look at. The word discipline in the minds of most people is a word that we don't like to use. It's an idea kind of like work. We don't like to think about it too much. But we need to think about the idea of disciplining ourselves. We need to be a disciplined type of individual. That's something that we should work for in our Christian life. What does that mean, or what are we thinking about when we talk about the idea of exercise or training or disciplining ourselves? Wikipedia defines a discipline as any training intended to develop moral character or to produce a pattern for behavior. Webster says it's a training that molds or perfects the mental faculties or moral character. And then I looked on my phone in the dictionary and it says an activity, exercise, or regimen that develops or improves a skill. So what we're talking about is we're putting into practice an activity, an exercise, or a program that will build us or develop our skill or our character of godliness. And when I was thinking about an example of a person who disciplined himself, I thought for a little while and I came up with the idea of Pistol Pete Maravich. Most everybody knows who Pistol Pete Maravich is. They had a movie out about him. He was a basketball player. I think most everybody knows who he was. He was a very talented basketball player who was very, when I was in high school or just coming out of high school, he was at LSU. He was a member of the LSU basketball team. But the movie shows why Pistol Pete became such a great basketball player. Everywhere he went, he disciplined himself to carry a basketball. He was constantly dribbling that basketball. He would even, riding in the car with his dad outside the window, go down the road, dribbling that basketball. He would be on the railroad track, dribbling that basketball. hitting the ties as he went down the road. And he was a phenomenal basketball player. He could handle a basketball better than anybody else in basketball. You know, he was in the time frame of basketball when a person could not carry a basketball. Nowadays, when people dribble, they're so good, they can put their hand under the ball and carry it like that. Physical feet didn't do it that way. He was a true dribbler of the basketball. But the reason that he was so great was because he disciplined himself to the point where he mastered that skill. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about disciplining ourselves to become a great Christian, to become the kind of person, to become a godly person like God wants us to be. We have to incorporate certain things in our lives and make them a practice in our life, a habit in our life, so that we do develop that skill of being a godlike person, doing the things that shows that we have the correct God, the correct position in our lives, and we put into practice those things that are divine in nature, so that we are like Jesus Christ. So what do we do? What things do we put into our lives that we develop as a habit so that we become a godly individual? I have 8 down here that I am going to just highlight for just a few minutes for our benefit tonight. And this, of course, probably does not, I know it doesn't take into everything in every account what we can do in order to develop the godliness, but if we put into practice or develop a habit of these things in our lives, I think we'll be well on our way to becoming a godly individual. So if you want to make note of these, I want us to look at that. Paul told Timothy, discipline yourselves, exercise yourself unto godliness, and that applies to us just as well. What are the disciplines that I want us to think about today? The first one is the discipline of prayer. You know, we think about it. Colossians 4 verse 2 says, continuing prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. The discipline of prayer is talked about by Jesus in Luke chapter 18 verse 1, where he said, unto this end, that men ought always to pray and not to think. You know, we look at 1 Thessalonians 5, and it says pray without ceasing. And we think about that in the sense of we ought to be a person of prayer. And I think that most of us understand and appreciate the fact that we should be prayer-minded people. But are we disciplined, prayer-minded people? Do we do it on a regular basis? Do we have a form or a habit of praying in certain times and places that makes us or draws us closer to God? If we think about it, we have the example of Daniel, who was a disciplined prayer in the Old Testament. We know how successful Daniel was. God talked directly to Daniel. Daniel was providentially cared for because of his prayer life. And so we see in Daniel chapter 6, it says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, they put a law together to try to make him stumble or to defeat him in his power and his relationship with the king. It says he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Daniel was a disciplined prayer. It says he prayed 3 times a day. How many times a day do you pray? I mean, how many times a day have you and I set aside that we're going to do on this particular time prayer to God? I hope that we have some form of discipline there. If not, you can see what I'm talking about here as far as disciplining our lives in order to become godly people. If we don't want to be the kind of people like the example of Daniel, then we need to set up time frames where we will be on our knees in prayer. And not necessarily on our knees, but that will be a time when we will be talking to God. Secondly, when I think about a discipline in my life that I need to develop so that I can become a godly person is that of meditation. Meditation, deep, uninterrupted contemplation on God's Word and other things worthy of such attention. What do you think about or set time aside to think about? Of course, we can think about what David said in Psalms 1 and verses 1 and 2. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and his law that he meditates day and night. We talk about things that have value, that need to be thought about on a consistent basis. Of course, the Bible is one of those that we need to set aside specific time to delve into and to think about seriously. Other things can be that way as well, because Paul talked to the Philippian brethren in Philippians 4 and verse 8, where he said, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. First and foremost in our thinking should be God's Word. We should spend time in it, putting it in our minds and to thinking about it. We've developed something in the congregation here to try to help us become people who meditate upon the Word of God. We set aside a verse every week for us to internalize. That means that is a thing that the congregation is determined to use to help us become people who meditate upon the Word of God. I ask you a simple question. Do you take advantage of that one verse and meditate upon it at all during the work week? I think that would be a good place for us to start. If we haven't, it's not just a matter of meditating. Meditating is not just a matter of memorizing, but it's a matter of taking the words, the thoughts individually in that particular passage and seeing what they mean and how to apply those things and different things. And it can take us in a lot of different ways, depending on where we are in our faith and our maturity as far as Christians are concerned. One passage of Scripture might take me in a different direction than it might take you. And so when I meditate upon passages of Scripture, I may grasp something from it and grow spiritually in one direction, where you may look at it and it may bring different meaning to your life and cause you to grow in a different way. But meditation is important. We can't grow if we don't meditate upon the Word of God. And of course, when we look at what David said, blessed is the man, we can be guaranteed that God will bless us and we will grow godly if we will but take the time to meditate. Thirdly, when I think about a discipline in my life, in your life, that will help us to become godly people, is that of fasting. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on fasting. I think maybe what we will probably do is we'll look at all these disciplines in a little more detail in the next few weeks. But we want to think about these in a general sense right now. The idea of fasting. When it comes to fasting, I don't know, I've done it on occasion. And I've done it in a short period of time. But as far as fasting as a discipline, I don't have it as a discipline. I would say for the most part, most people do not fast as a discipline in their life. But that is a very, very important characteristic or quality of discipline that the Christian should have. Think about what happened in Mark chapter 9, in verse 29, where it said, this kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. There are certain things in our lives, certain situations that we run into that require fasting. I don't know about your life and where you've been, but there are situations in my life where, there was more needing than what I had as far as to get me through this. And fasting is a way that we appeal to God. We put aside the physical and put our attention on God. In this particular situation, Jesus had just come down off from the Mount of Transfiguration, and he had his apostles there. He took Peter, James, and John with him up on the mountain, but he left the rest of the apostles there with the disciples and those who were following Jesus Christ. Some of them not even disciples. The man brought his son up to have them to remove a demon from his son. And they had the power to heal people, the power to remove demons and do things, because Jesus had given them that power. But they couldn't remove this one. The apostles couldn't do it. And they came down, and when they got aside privately, they asked him, why couldn't we do it? And that's when he responded. You had to take part in fasting in order to accomplish this particular situation. I think that teaches us that fasting is a discipline that we should make a part of our lives. And make it a part, not just on occasion when we run into a hardship or a situation that's very difficult, but on a regular basis. I know there are people who are not even Christians who have disciplined themselves to fast for health reasons on a weekly basis. We're talking about spiritual benefits here, not just physical benefits of fasting. And so it's important. In Acts 13, verses 1 through 3, Paul and some others had gone down to Antioch to work with the church there. It says that they were praying and they were fasting, and God said, set aside Paul and Barnabas for the work whereunto I called them. It says in verse 3, and when they had fasted and prayed and laid their hands on them, they sent them away. Before the church was to engage in an important work, they set aside time to fast about that. I don't think it would be inappropriate for us as a congregation to set aside a time for fasting in light of a particular thing that we want to accomplish in the light of God's Word and what He wants us to do. We're talking about a discipline that we're doing individually and as a congregation to accomplish the works of God. Do we truly want to accomplish things for God? Are we willing to set ourselves aside time to accomplish those things and to appeal to God to help us to be successful as a congregation and as individual Christians? The fourth discipline, the discipline of singing. You know, it's evident that singing is an important aspect or part of the Christian life. We are commanded in Ephesians and Colossians to sing as a congregation, and we understand that in the course of worship, that is a part of it. But we're not talking about, and that can be a discipline, we come to worship in a disciplined way to sing praises to God. But what I'm talking about is individual. Singing as an individual. Do I discipline myself and sing on a consistent basis throughout the week? You know, sometimes I ask people, what's their favorite hymn? And they'll say just any one. I've got an individual I know now, and I know exactly what his favorite hymn is. Because he's disciplined himself to sing. But you know, I think that even in that respect, that has developed because of his discipline to sing in his past life. Prior to now, that was a discipline that he involved himself in, and it is now a part ingrained in him. I think that says great things about people because of that. Do we have a song that when we're happy we can sing? Does something come to our mind, a tune or whatever, because of great things that God has done for us? Do we take time aside to praise God? Can you name 4 or 5 songs that you think about on a weekly basis during the week? Singing is a discipline. It shows that we're happy. James 5 and verse 13. Is any merry? Let him sing songs. I would dare say that, spiritually speaking, we're not very happy if we don't take just a minute to sing. And I'm not talking about even a full hymn or a full song, but a tune or something that is a part of our spirituality, a hymn during the week. I would question our spirituality if something doesn't come to our mind at some time about the greatness of God and how He's treated us throughout our lives. But it's a discipline. It's a discipline that we can develop in singing that shows our excitement about Christianity and our thanksgiving and our praise for God. You know, you think about the discipline of singing. David said this in Psalms chapter 71, verse 23. My lips shall greatly rejoice when I sing unto thee, and my soul which thou hast redeemed. David made it a practice of singing on a regular basis because what he knew God had done for him. You know, if we think about it, the discipline of singing can be seen no matter what stage of life we're in and what our circumstances are. Acts 16, Paul and Silas in prison. What did they do? They sang hymns. Even after they'd been cast into prison, after they'd been beaten, their practice was, their discipline was to sing hymns to God. And it didn't stop when they were in trying situations because they knew ultimately what the outcome of their life was and what God would do for them. Not the releasing them of prison necessarily, not even the saving of their lives, but they knew that they were in a state where they could know that even if life was over, they would be in a good state. And so that produced singing to them. They made it a habit of singing, and therefore, even in the most difficult of situations, they could sing. What about you and I? What do you and I do when we run into difficult situations? Problems in our lives. Is singing a part of it? For most people, it probably isn't. The next discipline that I want us to think about, as far as becoming a godly person, is that of giving. Are we disciplined givers? I'm not talking again about the worship. We know that we're commanded upon the first day of the week to lay by and store. But I'm talking about, do we make it a habit to be generous to other people? Hebrews 13 and verse 16 says, but to do good and to communicate, forget not. For with such sacrifices God is well pleased. God loved us and He gave the best that He could for us so that we might have eternal life. If we're to be godly people and have godliness in our lives, and to be like God is to be a giving person. A disciplined giver, one who looks for opportunity to share with others. And I'm not necessarily talking about financial. We can share a good word. We can share an encouraging word. We can offer things to people of need. It's help and support and encouragement. Are we truly giving people? Or are we constantly looking out for ourselves? You know, this discipline is directly linked to the means by which we lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven. 1 Timothy 6, Paul says in verse 17, charge them that are rich in this world that they be not high-minded nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. That they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, laying up and store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. How does one lay up treasures for himself in heaven? By being a disciplined giver to those who are in need. The sixth discipline that I want us to think about in becoming a godly person is that of assembling together. Hebrews 10, verse 24 and 25. I probably don't even need to read this. All of you can probably quote it, which is a good passage of Scripture to know. It says, and let us consider one another, provoke unto love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another daily, and much the more as you see the day approaching. Paul, the apostle who wrote, the writer of Hebrews, said that it's important. It's important to discipline yourselves in the attendance of the assembly of God. We are there because of two things. If you look according to what is said in Hebrews 10, the first thing it says in verse 24, let us consider one another. We assemble together. We have the discipline, or we discipline ourselves to assemble together because we're thinking about the other persons. We're thinking about each other. When we think about considering one another, many people think about assembly in the sense of the benefits that they get from it. But we need to look at it from the standpoint of what other people get from our being in the assemblies. We are either an encouragement to the assembly, or we're, by not being there, a discouragement to the assembly. Most people don't see it that way. They're not here, and they don't think about what effect it has on other people. Let us not forget that we're here because we're thinking about each other and trying to encourage each other. And that's the second point in verse 25. But exhorting one another. We assemble together to encourage, to exhort each other in the Christian life. It's a discipline that we want to make a part of our lives because we want to be encouraging people. How can you best be an encouraging person? Be at every assembly. Encourage everybody else to be at the assembly. Look for those who are not there and find out how you might help them to be there, what the situation was that you might be able to help them so that they can be a part of it. Let them know that they're missing. You know, assembling is God's avenue for us to show consideration for one another and encouraging one another. The early church saw it. Think about what was said in Acts 2 about the early church. And they continued daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, and did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. They saw the importance of getting together, and they wanted to be a part of it. They disciplined their lives where they were doing it, not just on Sunday and Wednesday, but every day of the week. I'm not saying that that's what we need to do necessarily, but I think that we need to see the importance of getting together and being a part of the assemblies, whatever they may be, whether it be worship, Bible study, or a work of the church. We all need to be a part of that because there is great benefit in that. And that's how we develop a godly character. Well, number 7, when we think about the qualities or characteristics that we need to discipline ourselves in order to become a godly person, that is a hospitality. The act of showing kindness to strangers. Hebrews 13:2 says, be forgetful Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Remember them that are in bonds as bound with them, and them which suffer adversity as being yourselves also in the body. The writer of Hebrews told those people that they were to be the kind of people who shared with people who they didn't know. Sometimes in this day and age it's a little difficult to be that way because so many people take so much advantage of people today. But we can't let the bad attitude and the bad actions of people keep us from being the kind of people who show hospitality to others, who share with others who are in need or who we can be of benefit to. And then the last discipline that I want us to think about is that of teaching. The discipline of teaching. Hebrews 5 and verse 12 says, For the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and have become such as have need of milk, and not of strong drink. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongeth to them that are full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to know or discern between good and evil. We all have a responsibility to develop and discipline ourselves to becoming teachers. Not everybody has the skill or the ability to preach. I guess I'm the perfect example of that. Not everybody has the skill or the ability to teach a Bible class. But everybody has the ability to talk to somebody about Jesus Christ and what Jesus Christ has done for them and how they became a Christian and what Christianity is all about. That's what we're talking about, becoming a teacher. Are we developing the discipline of opening our mouths and talking to people about Jesus Christ? Or is it all we talk about are the current events of the day? The weather, sporting events, what's going on in politics? We need to discipline ourselves to make Christianity and the faith a part of our lives so that we are sharing it with other people. This is not easy and it will take time and effort. But I think that as we think about disciplining our lives, this is one that we have to develop if we are to be godly people, if we are to please our Father in heaven. You know, when we think about it, the benefits of teaching another one is more for the teacher than for the student. I've grown greatly and I appreciate the opportunities that I've had to preach. But it's challenged me, and I've grown in my own heart and soul and knowledge because of the challenge that has been laid before me. I'm thankful for it. Sometimes it's a little difficult, but I have benefited from it. And the same is true for everyone here. If we will challenge ourselves to discipline ourselves to become teachers, we will benefit from it even more than those who we might have the opportunity to talk to about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. 1 Timothy 4 verse 8, the verse that we started out with. For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable in all things, having promise of the life that now is, and that which is to come. That's what we're talking about. We talk about disciplining our lives, taking the time to set aside so that we make a habit of these things in our lives. We're going to benefit. When we discipline our lives, we will grow to become godly people. I can guarantee that. That's the Bible saying that, not me. It says that we are to be godly people. We're to be like Jesus Christ. What did Jesus Christ say about disciplining ourselves? Luke 6 and verse 4. The disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. That's what we're striving for, to be like Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ had every one of these things in his life. He was the master of them all. He had perfected them. And if we want to be like Jesus Christ, then that's what we need to do, is to administer these in our lives and become masters to the best of our ability at it. You know, Jesus wants you and I to be his disciples. He said this in Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, You know, I always can remember what Brother Roy Deaver said about Matthew 28, verse 19. He would say, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations." That teach all nations right there is make disciples. That's our responsibility, first and foremost, to become a disciple and to become as much like Jesus Christ as we possibly can. That means that we're going to discipline ourselves towards God. Discipline ourselves towards becoming like Jesus Christ, and that's what we're talking about tonight. If you think about it, though, being a disciple is not a carefree life. Many people go into Christianity thinking that it's going to make life easy, that it's going to be carefree and you're not going to have any worries. But it's not a carefree life, but it's a life that cares about the most important things and applies itself to those things. So I hope you'll consider seriously tonight whether or not you are a disciple of Jesus Christ. Are you disciplining yourself to become more like Jesus? Or are you living the carefree life? Jesus told his apostles to go out and teach all nations and make disciples. People who would learn and follow Jesus and become like him. If you're not a Christian, becoming a disciple means that you will be repentant of your sins and be baptized in the name of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If you are a Christian, being a disciple means that you're working towards improving your life and becoming more like Jesus Christ. And you can change your life if you've not been doing that, confessing that sin and repenting of it, praying God for forgiveness, and becoming more like Jesus. Making a commitment to yourself that you will be a person who is disciplining their lives so that they will be a godly person. Tonight you have an opportunity. I want to encourage you to think seriously about where you stand as a disciple of Christ. And if you need to make a change in your life, do it now while we stand for us.
Hear the sweet voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me, I am the way." Pardon the loving call of faith. Come, for he loves you so. Only a step, only a step. Come, for he bled for you and I. He's the same loving Savior yet. Jesus, the crucified. And see your blood be burdened down. Come to the cross, the world may frown. Yet you shall wear a glorious crown when he makes up his own. Only a step, only a step. Come, for he bled for you and I. He's the same loving Savior yet. Jesus the crucified. Open for you the pearly gate. Love was for you. Now watch and wait. Terrible call to cry today. Jesus, I come to thee. Only a step, only a step. Come, for he bled for you and I. He's the same loving Savior yet. Jesus the crucified. everyone here that needs to take the Lord's Supper this time? Thank you for being here today. Hope you can stick around for the cookie swap. We'll have our Wednesday singing this Wednesday. It's the third Wednesday of the month, 7 p.m. Our final song will be 826. Are there any final announcements that we need to make this time?
Excellent. That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Paxton, again, a reminder of those. Paxton is home with strep throat and has a stomach virus as well. Okay. There is an envelope. We're collecting money for pizza on Sunday for our guest service. Pizza will be our lunch on Sunday. So if you'd like to donate to that. Anything else? In the back window. 826. I'll be listening. If you'd like to stand as we sing a song, you may. Sing the first and last verse. When the Savior calls, I will answer. When He calls for me, I will hear. When the Savior calls, I will answer. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. Yes, for my name. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. If my robe is white when He calls me, if my robe is white, I will give. If my robe is white when He calls me, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. Yes, for my name. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening for my name.
You're the ones that are ready to save their first night. Turn on the hell. The second one, learn your name tonight.
Make sure your hands are washed.
There you go.